Welcome to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. Today, I am celebrating a major milestone. You guys, the Legal Paige podcast is at 100 episodes. That's right. We have reached our numero 100 episode. Woo! Everybody party. Over the past 99 episodes, you guys, I've given you tons of legal tips, of course, but some boss CEO tips, tons of guest experts, and really like a ton more as well. You've watched me and TOP rebrand, grow, and expand. And now I just thought it was really appropriate to have a reflection episode on my past 99 episodes and give you some of my favorite ones and takeaways, and also go through where we all started back in 2019 here at TLP and myself personally to where we are now with the TLP business and podcast. So this episode is going to be juicy and full of good information. So listen up, Legal Pagers. Let's do this. You're listening to the Legal Paige podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hey, TLP podcast friends. I am excited to be celebrating this 100th episode with all of you. Making it to this milestone would never have been possible if it wasn't for all of you listening in. Seriously, our listeners and subscribers who come back week after week. I just wanted to give you all a special shout out and thank you for your continued support. It really, truly means a lot. And to see you guys coming back and listening and sending me DMs and emails about podcast episodes makes me continue to do this. Having a podcast and basically like publishing it all yourself, not doing it for like big monetary gains at all because we don't do any ads or anything like that. I really, truly just do this for you as like a free educational resource and a fun way for me to reach out to people in the entrepreneurial small business space in various ways. We do our blogs, we do our podcasts, we do lots of lives and webinars and things like that. But to continue the podcast on for over 2 years is just crazy to me. So seriously, like you guys coming back all the time and just giving me the like little nuggets of support here and there, every other day or something. It really means a lot. I also wanted to give another big thank you to all of the guests who have made an appearance on the show, because a lot of these episodes, of course, would not come to fruition without you. And then my back-end business gurus and VAs who have helped make this podcast come to life along the way. You all know who you are, who have worked for TLP in some way, shape, or form since the beginning of 2019 when this podcast started. And of course, a big, like huge thank you to my now podcast manager, Morgan, for really pushing the TLP podcast to new heights and helping us just continually stay up to date with trending stories and legal news, making sure all of my outlines are squared away before I record, helping me come up with new podcast episodes, launching podcast episodes every week, working with our phenomenal podcast editor, Daniel, and just being an overall amazing human. Morgan, big shout out to you, girlfriend. So in this 100th episode, Morgan and I were really talking about, okay, what could I do and talk about to make this something special? Because I didn't just want to like continuing on. We had in the feed of things coming down the line of the TLP podcast, we had already planned out like the past few months or next few months. And I think I voxered Morgan and said, I think we should do something different for the 100th episode. Like it's my 100th episode. And she was like, absolutely. I totally agree. So we pushed this week's episode, which was supposed to be, I don't know, probably something boring and legal, but you guys would learn something from it, to, next week or just down the line further. And I just wanted to record this. So I'm literally recording this the week it comes out. And I really wanted to go through kind of like starting the TLP podcast, what we did then versus what we do now, kind of a look back. And then, of course, I wanted to give you guys some of my favorite vault episodes. If you are kind of new here to the TLP podcast and you want to go back and listen to some that are my favorite and also just people's favorites that have been listened to quite a few times. I also wanted to touch on how TLP has grown as a business over the past 100 episodes. I'm not going to make that super lengthy, but just give you guys a summation of what has occurred and gone down over the past 2.5 years. And then I'll wrap up this episode with the future of TLP and the podcast as a whole. So to get started, let's go back to when I started the TLP podcast. I'm sure many of you are wondering, like, why did I even start a podcast? And kind of what fears that I had at the beginning of, I don't know, being a podcaster, I guess you could call me. So we started the podcast, my first episode launched February 11th, 2019. We were prepping it kind of the end of 2018. In 2018, I had a huge mastermind that I was a part of. TLP was coming it was literally coming into existence. I started TLP, like the blog and the back end of it at the beginning of 2018. I was still working for a federal judge at the time. And then I finished my legal job and I started the legal Paige end of August, beginning of September, 2018. So in that fall and winter, I was really thinking about all of the entrepreneurial things I could do as kind of marketing tactics and just ways to get my name, my voice, my educational resources out there into the world, because TLP just really wasn't even a thing. We had a website and that was about it. I had maybe 5 contracts available. And I knew that I loved speaking. I had been in speech and debate for many, many years, basically since high school. I did the debate team in college. I was on moot court and trial team in law school. And speaking was, I would say, something that I really enjoy and was also a good skill of mine. While I'm also good in person, in my opinion, and can do, good talks one-on-one with people and webinars and of course keynotes and breakout sessions at conferences, I just thought that podcasting would be a good way for me to get my voice out there and my legal knowledge and entrepreneurial knowledge out there to people week after week in kind of an easier fashion. So that's why I started the TLP podcast. I thought it'd be helpful to people, honestly. That's just why I started it. Fears that I had was basically the fears that any first-time podcaster has. Am I going to have time to record all these podcasts? Can I keep up with it? Are people actually going to listen? Is this going to be worth it? Do I have enough to say on podcasts? Can I make it interesting each and every episode? Are we going to have enough money to keep this going as a business? All of those were my fears that I had. And I would say we accomplished all of them. Yes, it's going to be fine. So that's kind of where we started at the beginning of 2019. Also, the equipment that we used was so different. And I wanted to touch on that, just very specific for podcasters listening in. You guys will not believe it, but I bought a $40, $50 mic from Amazon. And I made a little box out of that foam stuff that you see in recording studios. And then I just tried my best to work with my podcast editor to make it sound somewhat decent. And that is how I recorded the TLP podcast for almost 2 years. Isn't that insane? It's just so crazy to me. And I think they sound pretty good. I mean, go back and listen to, I would say, at least the first 50-ish episodes. And I don't think they were bad by any means, but I think they could have been better. So lo and behold, I still use the same podcast editor, if you can believe it. Daniel is the man. He's actually the only man in our TLP team, actually. And he's truly been a godsend the past couple of years. He's always on top of the editing. I truly feel like the weight is off my shoulders knowing it's done right. And with the utmost integrity, he's always on top of it. He's, asking questions. If we have changes, he quickly edits them. I mean, he is so good at what he does. Daniel, please don't leave me ever, ever, ever. Wink, wink, as you're editing this episode. So then him and I were kind of talking at the beginning of this year on how we could up-level the TLP podcast. I knew I wanted to continue it on. I just wanted like a better overall quality and sound. And we kind of looked at different podcast mics, and I talked to other podcasters as well as just friends in the industry who are continually online or, using more legit mics, I would say. So I upgraded my mic at the beginning of 2021 to the Shure MV7. It's a USB podcast microphone, and it also stands on a fabulous Rode boom arm. And I love it because it doesn't sit on my desk. It's really like I can just swing it around. It like clips on the side of my desk. And so the stand that I had my previous podcast mic on just like sat on my desk, and it would kind of move, and it was cumbersome. And this one, the boom arm, as I'm like literally looking at it right now, it just kind of like swings around, and then it's out of my way, and then it's right there. Like I don't have to go grab it out of my closet. I don't have to get like my non-bougie, super makeshift foam box to, help make the sound not echo in my office. And I feel like this mic is honestly, it's just better all around. I can easily record things in my office and not have to go into a closet and record. You all know the podcasting world on how we all try to make everything sound better, even though we might be recording it in a really weird location. So in my opinion, it does sound better. I'd love your feedback on that. If you're listening to this episode, let me know if you think that the past, I would say like 20-ish episodes sound a bit better. You can just go like to your favorite podcasting platform and check like from 2021 on what the sound of those podcasts are and kind of compare them to previous episodes. Just from your perspective, especially as listeners, I would love some feedback on that because we have spent a little bit of time making sure that this sounds pretty good for you all. And then how did the podcast look back then in 2019 to now? Because 2020 was in between there, right? So everyone knows that felt like 10 years occurred. I feel like 2019 was a bazillion years ago. Do you guys feel me? Yes. So back then, like my podcast cover was different. I would say the formats of each episode weren't necessarily different per se. But I kind of utilized the podcast in a different fashion because I didn't really have any reasoning behind it or CTAs or, places to direct people because I was new. I was new to the entrepreneurial space. TLP was a brand new business. So with that, you guys have probably heard, I have a branding episode in the TLP podcast. If you kind of go back to last year in the summertime, I think I launched my branding episode, The Evolution of TLP's Brand. Go back and listen to that episode if you want to. But I wanted to just touch on how it was so different. So I was kind of riffing on my old photography branding because I didn't know any better, honestly. And I hadn't really found who I was and my vibe as the legal Paige yet. And so it was very pink, very feminine, very just bubbly, I would say, which is me in some fashion. But I feel like Paige as a lawyer was a lot different. And especially my podcast episodes, I was coming across different. I am like pretty welcoming. I like to be the lawyer that everyone truly feels like they have a place at the table with, that I'm giving you guys like easily digestible legal information where you're not kind of talking to a stuffy lawyer. So I feel like I truly do have a lot of that personality that is like fun, Paige, bubbly, but I also can like get to shit really quickly. And I could be very forthright and honest as, when I wear my legal hat. Lawyer Paige is just, she can kind of, turn pretty quickly. And I like to think of myself as kind of big sister Paige, telling you the right way to do things, like, please don't do this, please don't do that. And sometimes I have to be a little bit harsher. And with my branding, it didn't just meld together. So what I'm overall saying here is obviously my podcast cover has changed, our branding has changed, and I would say the way that I come across in episodes has changed too. I definitely feel more comfortable podcasting now. Like right now, I'm like kind of going off of a bullet point outline, and I'm just talking to you all. I truly feel like I'm just talking to friends on the TLP podcast, and that you're all just sitting here like right across from me listening, which feels good because when you first start as a podcaster, it can be a little awkward. I'm not going to lie. And you kind of just have to let that go. And over time, it's just like, riding a bike. You just keep getting on it. You keep podcasting. You get better and better each time. You really learn how to like cut things on your own and your own speaking style and how to work with your editor and how to just make things flow as best as possible. So I have really learned a lot. And so the TLP podcast, I think, looks a little bit different and sounds a little bit different now in that respect. In terms of format, though, I feel like we had a really good format in place for outlines and such at the very, very beginning because I had help from other podcast friends on how to make things more streamlined and legit from the get-go. I took like a podcast course. I knew people that were like big in the podcasting world. I got lots of good feedback from people who had been guests on podcasts, what they liked, what they didn't like, how they felt prepared or not prepared, and how I could just make things better. I am someone that doesn't just step into something this big like podcasting or a completely new avenue of content, I would say, online without a plan in place and without doing it at least 150%. I don't like to kind of half-ass things, I guess is the best way to put it. And so if you know me, I'm like Enneagram 3, type AA personality. I had to have things ready to go. And so we did. We had outlines ready to go. I got lots of feedback. I wanted to make guests feel welcome. We had all of like guest gifts set up. And my assistant was really helping me at the beginning of the TLP podcast, making sure that this podcast truly seemed like it had it together and people were willing to come on, people were willing to listen, and it wasn't just kind of like fluff at the beginning, I guess. So the only thing I would say that was different at the beginning of the TLP podcast was I felt very sporadic with episode content. We had some legal, we had some business, we had lots of like guest episodes that honestly didn't truly fit in the TLP podcast. I was just new to the entrepreneurial space. I was trying to get friends on the podcast because that's what they told you should do is like bring friends onto the podcast. They will share your podcast and you will get more listeners. But I feel like I learned really early on that people wanted Paige to talk about legal stuff because I am the legal Paige. And lots of our basic like legal toolkit type episodes that are in the first 10 to 20 episodes of the Legal Paige podcast, if you scroll back, those are some of our most listened to episodes because they're truly foundational episodes. And I learned when we had guests on, the guest episodes that tended to do better were still kind of aligned in the legal space in some respect versus someone just talking randomly about something business-wise that could help someone. I just feel like those type of guests are better suited for other podcasts, just like business, 101 podcasts. People who are just talking about random things business-wise each and every week. That's where those type of guests fit in. And I didn't learn that until I would say about a year into podcasting. And so now we're very particular with bringing guests on where there's always a legal spin to the episode, because that is where my genius lies and my education and knowledge base is best served. And so I can really interact and talk with people. So if we're talking about, say, like mentorship or coaching, I'm always going to have a legal spin and legal questions for the guest. I like to have tax tips on here because, of course, that coincides with legal things. I like to talk about estate planning and build, just the back end business legalities of being a CEO. And then for me, I felt like the CEO tips and just overall business tips should come from me growing the Legal Page. And I loved kind of being on those solo episodes myself versus having someone else come in just because of the way that this podcast is set up. So that is kind of how it looks now versus then. And lastly, I wanted to give you guys a list of my favorite vault episodes. So I'll give you a second, grab a piece of paper, grab your notes on your Mac if you're listening on your Mac, grab your notes on your phone if you're on an iPhone or whatever smartphone note app you may have. And I'm going to list out a few here. And I think you should listen to them. There's some of my favorites, and then there's some that are your guys' favorites that I've been listening to a lot. So my first favorite episode is episode 6, the Entrepreneur's Agreement Toolbox. And that kind of goes through all of the agreements that I think every entrepreneur needs to have in their toolkit. One of my faves, foundational episodes. Go listen to episode 6. Episode 21 is one of my favorite guest episodes, and it's with another attorney, Ife Ibekwe. Ivy, I'm just shouting you out, girlfriend. You know that I love you. She is all about estate planning, and the episode is titled, Hey Millennial Women, Estate Planning is for You Too. And it's very specifically tailored to women entrepreneurs who don't ever think about the what if situations and how to estate plan, especially when you're kind of building your own legacy and building your own wealth as a small business owner. And it's a really, really good episode that lots of people would never think about some of the things we talk about in the episode. I also love episode 35 called Organizing Your Contract Clauses. I talk about this quite a bit at different conferences, events, online, virtual chats or webinars. And I think it's another one of those foundational episodes that every person needs to listen to on why your contract should be organized the way that it should be organized. Episode 37 is really good as well. It was me talking about this was like December 2019 and things were going down right after I launched this podcast episode. But there was, during kind of the holiday season, November and December, every year, there's tons of giveaways online. And I was just seeing not so great, not legit giveaways happening. So I recorded this episode. And then episode 40 and 41 about influencer responsibilities came out. And these two are some of our top listened to episodes because of the much heated and tenuous bucket list family showdown on social media that occurred. I got on, I did one of my legal page rants. I think called them out when they needed to be called out. And then it literally blew up and I went viral and I got like way too many thousands of new followers. I had a lot of hate messages. It was a lot. But these two episodes, I did reflections on the legalities of influencer responsibilities and kind of what happened in the aftermath of it. So episode 40 and 41, if you want to listen to it, definitely go listen to those. Episode 48, I talk about don't use Venmo for business transactions. This is back when Venmo Business didn't exist. And then that coincides really well with episode 80, all about the Venmo business profile. So in episode 48, I was kind of giving you guys just the basics of what Venmo was supposed to be used for, the terms and conditions of Venmo, and why it was important to not use it for business transactions. And then Venmo got smart and they built a Venmo business profile that's a lot more legitimate for small business owners. And so in episode 80, I go on as kind of a continuation episode about why I suggest the Venmo business profile for people who still want to use the Venmo app for business transactions. And then episode 65 is all about how to take retainer payments the right way. One of our also most listened to podcast episodes in the TLP podcast vault. People were freaking out about deposits and retainers for the past year and a half. And episode 65 was at the end of 2020. And I talk all about retainers, why the word retainer is very important, and kind of how to take them the right way to ensure that you don't have to refund non-refundable retainers. So go listen to that one. And finally, episode 90. I've recently recorded this one kind of in spring 2021, and it's called What I Learned in 6 Weeks Off Social Media. This one is not legal based. It's a very personal episode. And I really think it speaks to a lot of us who market and are constantly online and get bogged down with social media. And I took 6 weeks off of social media. I just go listen to it. I have a different take on it because I do have a team. So I understand that it has a varying perspective than many of you probably. But I think there's some really good nuggets in there. And I got good feedback from this episode of me just really sharing my heart about that side of business ownership. So episode 90 is also a solid one to listen to. All right, now that I've taken you down memory lane with the TLP podcast, how has TLP itself as a business grown over the past 100 episodes? Many of you probably know I was basically a one-woman show at the beginning. I was Paige of the legal page, and I had some, random VA contractors back in the day. That's virtual assistant for any of you that are wondering what that acronym means. But I was doing everything. I was podcasting. I was being the lawyer. I was writing all the contracts. I was writing all the blogs. I was putting everything up on the back end. Like, I literally wore all the hats, which many of you can attest to. It's very challenging. And over the past 3 years almost, we're coming up on our 3-year anniversary for the legal page as a business at the end of August. I have expanded my team drastically. We have 2 full-time employees. We have a lot of very specific part-time people. We have lots of contractors that have been on board for a long time. We have lots of businesses we've worked with for a long time, like my podcast editor, my bookkeeper, my copywriter. Those type of people have been on board and have seen the transition of TLP over time. Also, our contract templates are very, very different since the beginning of me starting to record the legal page. I didn't, like I said previously in this episode, I didn't have a lot of reasoning behind my episodes, like calls to action at the end where I could send people. I tried, but I just didn't have this massive list of contracts that I could be talking about. We probably started with 5 to 10 basic contracts on the legal page shop online. And now we have over 250 products, maybe over 300. I don't really know, because over time we have our big full length contracts. Those are probably our most purchased items on the legal page shop. I primarily started in the wedding industry and specifically for photographers because I was a photographer. So that was my niche from the get-go. And we kind of filled that space of photography contracts. And then I expanded into more wedding industry contracts. So we added in DJ, florist, wedding planner, videographer, blah, 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 so on and so forth, right? And then we started realizing that there's other small businesses out there that are primarily marketing online or are solopreneurs, and they wanted legal help too. And so now we have this vast array of coaching contracts and health and wellness contracts, random entrepreneurs that just help all of these businesses that I'm talking about, the actual helpers, that assist these businesses to make these businesses what they are. So, copywriters, graphic designers, editors, virtual assistants, podcast managers, Pinterest managers, you get my drift here. So all of those contracts we now have as well. And then we have tons of little legal forms that people need that kind of add on to their main client contract. So adding things to people's legal toolkits. That's why that entrepreneur agreement toolkit episode it's a really good one to listen to, because you can kind of see how we can continually make template contracts at the TLP shop and how I can I don't know. Every time I'm astounded that we have more and more contracts to create. And every time I need to create new contracts, I'm honestly just astounded that there's more contracts out there that I can draft up and make into a template that people can utilize as business owners. And then in the TLP shop, we also realized that some people have existing contracts, and it might be good to have individual clauses of contracts available for people to purchase and kind of input into their existing contracts for future client use. So we have individual clauses as well. And that is how we've just compounded and expanded and exponentially grown the TLP shop. So that is a huge thing about how TLP has grown over the past few 100 episodes. I have also realized that I'm able to really understand things more when I create contract templates, so I can expand upon those topics a lot more in podcast episodes. I can point to those specific products for people when they just want Paige, hold my hand, walk me through this. What do I need? Now we have those available to people. So that has really changed also how I record podcast episodes and what I talk about on them. And the last thing I want to say about how TLP has grown over the past 100 episodes, like I said, this is just a summation. There's so many other things that have happened with our business. But with building a team and having a ton of topics I can talk about, I have learned that batch recording podcast is a lifesaver. It's also unique for TLP. And I just want to touch on this a little bit so you guys kind of understand like how we plan things with the podcast, but we can't do things like other big podcasters do, which they're like 6 months out or 8 months out. And it's like hard to get on their podcast, and they literally batch record all the time, every single week. They have like a full day of podcasting for 8 hours. I don't do that, but I have gotten better at batch recording, where we have basically like a on deck podcast list of things I have recorded that are edited and are ready to be launched if we need them. And we try to keep a pretty good account of what's to come, because that helps with our, newsletter copywriting. It helps with what we're planning out on social media. It helps with me kind of getting my headspace in the right frame of mind for that week, like what I'm overall talking about. So it doesn't seem like it's coming out of left field on social media or my Facebook group. So it's nice to have a plan in place. And we do batch record quite a bit here at the Legal Page. But the one thing that I have learned that's unique in our position as TLP is we are lawyers here, and we like to keep like what is on tap, what is happening in the industry that people want to hear about right now, right here. And with that, it's hard to like always plan out and batch record things, because if I have an episode about like, I don't know, something simple like independent contractors versus employees, that's coming out next week. But what's happening this week in the news and in the media and things that are going down right now with client issues in my Facebook group and the industry is worried about with their contracts, like that is more pertinent for me to talk about than this one that I've already recorded and have on deck. So we oftentimes, and this is how my podcast manager, Morgan, and I really work together well, is she knows that things could always change quickly. And Paige could be like, we can't do that this week. It's not going to work. It's not going to fly with my audience. It's not what people want. And I think if you take anything from this episode as a business owner as a whole, it's do what your audience wants and help your audience, because they're the ones that are there for your business anyway, versus what's just easy. And while batch recording and having things all prepared in advance is awesome, I just don't think it's practical for a lot of business owners if you want to always be kind of at the forefront of people's minds. And that is something that I truly treasure and value as the owner of the Legal Page. And it's one of my morals and ethics behind the business I created, is I always want people to know that I have their back in that moment. And with that comes, sometimes I'm recording a podcast on a Monday or a Tuesday that's coming out on a Wednesday. And that's just life. And that's what we do here at TLP. So yes, I batch record more now, and it's definitely more planned out than it was, the first 10 to 20 episodes when I was just like running around trying to figure out my podcasting life. But I truly feel at peace now that I can batch record, but sometimes things come up and I just really want to talk about them on my podcast. All right. That's how TLP has grown over the past 100 episodes. What's the future? What's the future of TLP in the podcast? What can you as subscribers and listeners expect? Of course, you can always expect more discount codes that are exclusive to all of our listeners here on the podcast. So when you stay through episodes, I usually give discount codes at least halfway through. And then, of course, at the end, I will be giving you guys legal tips up the wazoo. You know that is not going to change. And I promise to always be at the forefront of the issues at hand and your legal go-to expert, all while doing, the la legal things that you expect from me and giving you some good CEO and business tips along the way, because I love adding those little nuggets of value for you. I also, the future of TLP, and I thought it'd be really fun to talk about this and end with this in this 100th episode, is who are some dream guests that I would love to have on the podcast. I want to manifest this out into the world. I doubt any of these people will come on my podcast, but I'm just going to think good thoughts and close my eyes and hope for the best. And maybe, just maybe down the road, I can have one of these phenomenal ladies join me here. So the first person is Oprah, because I've always wanted to talk and meet with Oprah, just because she's Oprah. Who doesn't want to talk and meet with Oprah? I'd love to talk about, honestly, her just journey as an entrepreneur and a businesswoman. And then these are actresses I'd love to have on the episode. Jennifer Lawrence and Meryl Streep, mostly just because I love them and they're some of my favorite actresses. I also really want to have Scarlett Johansson on the episode because of recent things that have occurred. Like I said, I'm always in the news and figuring out what's going on in the legal world. And she's the one that's suing Disney right now for a contractual dispute with the Black Widow movie that went on Disney Plus. But that would be such a fun episode to have her on. I mean, I'm sure she's not disclosing things and defaming or, anything regarding Disney. But it'd be a really interesting episode for specifically this podcast. I'd love to talk to Simone Biles, not only because she's the GOAT and she's amazing, but also because I would love to kind of talk about contractual implications potentially that she was worried about with the recent things that happened at the Olympics, and just things that she's faced over time. Obviously, she's been a part of a really tumultuous and emotional lawsuit, and then, now is basically an influencer as well, and she probably will be for some time. So it'd be interesting to talk to her. Political wise, you guys know I love politics. And so it'd be fun to integrate some political things into the podcast. I'd love to talk to Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, Stacey Abrams, AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. I'd love to talk to women like that on the episode, and especially those 5 women because I love them so much. Speaking of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, I would love to have had her on the podcast, but may she rest in peace now. That was one of those moments when she passed away. She was one of the most influential legal women in my life and in so many other people's lives as well as lawyers, that it's when she passed, I had this moment of, I'll never ever get to meet her or get to talk to her ever. And so that would have been cool to have her on the podcast. I'd also love to talk to some boss ass women in the small business entrepreneur space. Melinda Gates would be sick to talk to. Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook, would be awesome to talk to. Musical, artist wise, you guys know I love T Swift, but Taylor Swift and Haley Paige would be interesting to talk to about their kind of pioneering of the concrete, artist intellectual property issues that are happening in the legal space. They both fought for rights that really didn't exist in case law precedent. And Haley Paige is still continuing to fight this. But that would just be a sweet episode for you all to listen to. I mean, I'm manifesting if anyone, let's get T Swift on this podcast. But I don't think she does podcasts. It's okay. That's what manifestation is. I'd love to also talk to Ashley Graham. She is a plus size model and she's just one of my favorite figures online. I love watching her. I truly feel like she was one of the first people in the body positivity space. And she did this for, a decade plus of being someone that didn't necessarily fit into what an actual model looks like on the runway. And I just love her. And she's just so herself and doesn't give a crap. I just love Ashley Graham. So it'd be fun to talk to her too. And then the last couple of people I wanted to mention are just, I think it'd be really interesting episodes in terms of being real with people. And it's I want these people on my podcast, but I want to talk to them about things they probably don't want to talk about. So they probably never come on. But Jenna Kutcher would be really interesting to talk to. She was I did her mastermind back in 2019, and she truly did, like, in many respects, help me become the entrepreneur I am today. But she's also quite honestly, like, helped me realize a lot of things about being a high profile influencer online and what that looks like and the do's and don'ts of that. And I'd kind of like to get into some nitty gritty of like what happened with her back in 2020. I'm sure she doesn't ever even want to like open Pandora's box in that way. But as someone who was kind of her mentee, and then is like, I looked up to her, and then things changed quite drastically. And then she also went viral, and just like, there's so many things that happened to her in the online space. It'd just be interesting to talk to, right? And get those like never before asked questions answered. Speaking of, I would love to sit down and have a candid chat with Rachel Hollis about her poor behavior this year and how that has impacted her business and any legalities surrounding it as well. That would be an interesting episode. And then finally, in that respect, I'd love to chat with the Bucket List family. I would really, really, truly love to actually talk to them and hear their voices and not just random emails and things that I've gotten and like a bunch of backlash and all this stuff. I really, really want to ask them like what went down from their perspective versus what went down from my perspective. And hopefully we could kind of have like a, agree to disagree situation where we both share our feelings and it could be really open and honest. I don't think they're bad people at all. And I would just love to talk with them and be like, did you talk to lawyers? Like, what was happening? Really, do they take responsibility for anything that occurred? Because they didn't at the time, and they still don't. And they've thrown me under the bus a couple of times in like their own YouTubes and podcasts and things like that. And I'm just like, why? Like, what is the point? Why can't we just resolve this and be like, yeah, I made a mistake and take responsibility for that? But again, I feel like agree to disagree. They don't. Anyway, okay, I'm getting off track here. They would be interesting to have on the podcast. That is my point. That's my list. You guys, that's the 100th episode. Whoa, we're done. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for just sharing your space and your time with me. I hope that what I give you in this podcast is valuable and that there's some decent takeaways for you that you implement into your business life or personal life that just elevate what you're doing and either make you a better person or make you a better business owner. That's all I really want. Even if some things are in your ear and out the other with episodes, that's fine. I think that happens every day with everything we experience. But I think podcasts are a really cool way for us to kind of listen in the background or hear from people and learn from people that we truly respect and admire. And we hope for a better future for ourselves, whether, like I said, that's in business or personal life. And I will be back, of course, after this 100th episode. 101, numero 101 episode is going to be bomb as well, I promise you. Up to hopefully number 500. I don't know. I'll manifest that here at the end of this podcast episode that I'm going to continue this podcast on forever and ever. But thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys next week. Okay? Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpage.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.